Hello and welcome to Devil's Advocate. On Saturday, the Prime Minister's office issued a press release explaining why Hindalco was given a share in the Tilabara coalfield. But has that press release answered all the questions in the news, or are there still some that need to be addressed? That's the key issue I shall raise today with the Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, Montek Singh Ahluwalia. Mr. Ahluwalia, on Saturday, the Prime Minister's press release made it crystal clear that the Prime Minister had accepted and endorsed Mr. Parikh's advice to give Hindalco a share in the Tilabara coalfield. But does it not then follow that if the CBI believes that the decision to give Hindalco a share in that coalfield was in fact a conspiracy, the Prime Minister has to be part of that conspiracy?
I think the Prime Minister's press release makes one very straightforward point, and that is, in their view, and they've explained, on the facts that were available on the file before the Prime Minister, that was the right decision to take. Now, if the CBI has other information which leads to a different conclusion, that's a separate matter.
Let's come to the critical facts made crystal clear by the Prime Minister's press release before I return to the question I began by asking. To begin with, the Prime Minister's press release makes it absolutely clear that Kumaramangalam Birla wrote directly to the Prime Minister on the 7th of May 2005. 18 days later, that letter was sent to the Coal Ministry for investigation and examination. So the first point is that the process began with Kumaramangalam Birla writing to the Prime Minister and not to Mr. Parikh. Would you agree?
I have no idea whether he wrote to Mr. Parikh or not, but there's nothing wrong with people representing to the Prime Minister. People are doing it all the time.
The Prime Minister's press release doesn't mention any prior letter to Mr. Parikh. It begins with the letter Mr. Kumaramangalam Birla wrote the Prime Minister. So it's to be assumed that the process started with Mr. Birla writing to the Prime Minister.
As far as the Prime Minister's office is concerned, they took that as a representation to them, and they took action saying, please have it looked at. So that's perfectly right.
Now, the second thing that emerges from the Prime Minister's press release is that Mr. Parikh's recommendation only became a decision when the Prime Minister accepted it. The Prime Minister had a right to turn it down. Therefore, his acceptance was critical.
Absolutely.
And the third thing that emerges from that same press release is that when the Prime Minister accepted Mr. Parikh's recommendation, he did so by applying his mind, he did so by exercising judgment. He didn't simply sign on the dotted line because this was advice coming from a reliable coal secretary.
Well, I would say particularly, and this is very important, particularly because this is a decision which changed an earlier decision, and it was initiated by a reference from the Prime Minister's office. So I assume that everybody applies their mind all the time. But in this case, the office would have told the Prime Minister, there was an earlier decision, there was a representation to you, they've reconsidered the matter, and this is what they're now recommending. So I think that would have been given more attention than normal.
I want to underline the point you made because it's actually very important. In this specific instance, because the decision to share Talabira with Hindalco was a change of an earlier decision, the Prime Minister would have been particularly briefed about it, and he would have exercised his mind specifically to assure himself that this was the right decision to take.
I assume so, yes.
Therefore, it follows, and this is the conclusion of this particular set of questions that I'm putting to you, that the Prime Minister's press release actually corroborates the statement made by Mr. Parikh when he said that if Mr. Birla and he are guilty of a conspiracy, then the Prime Minister has to be part of that conspiracy as well. Because without the Prime Minister agreeing, the allocation to Hindalco could never have happened.
No, there's no question that the Prime Minister was the final decision point taking that decision. I have no idea on what basis the CBI decided to investigate further. You know, one of the key things you have to remember, CBI may have other information. CBI may find, I mean, for example, if the facts brought to the Prime Minister's notice on the file are incorrect or wrongly stated, or they have other signs of malfeasance, all of that would be relevant. What the Prime Minister has said is, the issue came up, the reasons for changing the decision were absolutely right, and there's been too much focus in the press just on the fact that there was a change. There's nothing wrong with changing a decision in the light of new facts.
I accept your point, and I'll come to the CBI in a moment's time, but at the moment I'm simply talking about the allegation that this decision to award part of Talabira to Hindalco was a conspiracy. And I put this to you. If it was a conspiracy, and I underline the word if, but because that's a CBI allegation, I'm pursuing it for argument's sake. If there was a conspiracy, it cannot be limited to just Mr. Birla and Mr. Parekh. It has to involve all the other people involved in taking that decision, and it has to include the Prime Minister, because without his endorsement and approval, without him signing on the dotted line, that allocation could never have happened.
No, look, this is a hypothetical question. It's good that you're posing.
It's a logical question.
No, for the following reason. A conspiracy can always be imagined to be something that cooks up some facts. So whether there was a conspiracy at a certain level or not is a separate issue. The CBI will look into it. What is correct is that if the facts are as recorded on the file, the Prime Minister has backed Parekh's decision. And that's absolutely clear.
We don't know if the CBI has other facts, because at the moment the CBI has not made anyone aware of them. But judging by the facts on the table, as made clear by the Prime Minister in his 5-page press release, he completely concurred with the opinion and conclusion that Mr. Parekh had come to.
That's right.
And if Hindalco got a share in Talabira on the basis of Mr. Parekh's conclusion, then the Prime Minister shared it.
Absolutely.
And therefore, if those facts constitute a conspiracy, then logically the Prime Minister has to be part of it.
Let's be very clear.
There can't be anything else.
I'm assuming that any suspicion of a conspiracy must relate to possible other information which is not on the file.
That's a presumption. We have no need to believe that is other information.
Let's be very clear. All that the CBI has done, and this is its job. I mean, remember, this is a court-supervised investigation. All that the CBI has done is they've taken the first step. They're going to investigate. You know, it's being wrongly presented that they've come to a conclusion.
No.
They have not come to a conclusion that there is a conspiracy. They want to examine it.
I'll come to what the CBI is suggesting, whether it's coming to a conclusion or whether it's just damaging reputations in a moment's time. I still want to stick with this question of a conspiracy. Can a conspiracy happen at a lower level and not involve the final authority who exercised his judgment, and without whose approval the allocation could never have happened? It's a simple question of logic. Can minor functionaries be conspiring without the top man being involved?
I'm not for a moment suggesting that this is what happened. But if you have at a lower level a falsification of facts,
which we don't have,
we don't know. Well, what I'm saying is that is what the CBI will look at.
The Prime Minister's statement seems to suggest that the facts that were given to him by Mr. Parekh were correct because the Prime Minister had them investigated and agreed by them. Well, he exercised his judgment. He didn't come to an opposite opinion.
No. The Prime Minister's office has to look at the facts as they come up to him on the file. Now, those facts, if they are doctored before they come up, if there was some misstatement, I mean, that's not something the Prime Minister's office checks.
For argument's sake, I'll accept that. You're simply saying that if in the remote possibility of Mr. Parekh doctoring facts and sending them up to the Prime Minister's office, which the Prime Minister's office didn't discover were doctored, then it's just about possible that in the doctoring of the facts there's a conspiracy.
Let me say,
that is unlikely.
I'm not saying it's him. The CBI will determine whether even the facts that went up to Parekh were doctored before they went up to him. Who knows?
Let's then come and move away from this question of a conspiracy to the second aspect of the Prime Minister's press release. The Prime Minister said, and I'm going to quote, "The Prime Minister is satisfied that the final decision taken in this regard was entirely appropriate and is based on the merits of the case." I underline those words, is based on the merits of this case. That clearly suggests that the Prime Minister doesn't believe there was a conspiracy here.
I would think so, yes. I mean, he has no reason to believe that. He's taken the facts on face value, and that's what you have to do in government. On the facts as stated before him, it was the right decision. He's backed the recommendation, and it's because he backed the recommendation that it actually became a decision.
Once again, I'm going to underline the very important thing you said. In your belief, the Prime Minister does not believe there is a conspiracy here.
You know, I don't want to put words. What happens is that on the facts before him, he obviously does not believe. If somebody finds there's some other fact, you have to keep
on the facts before him, he doesn't believe there's a conspiracy.
Absolutely.
Now, the problem is that the CBI, after filing the FIR, seems to be moving away from its original position, because 48 hours after it filed the FIR, the director of the CBI, Ranjit Sinha, in an interview to the Economic Times has said that Birla and Parekh could well be innocent, they could well be exonerated, clearly indicating that Mr. Sinha no longer has complete conviction in the case that he's brought or the FIR he's brought against him. And I put it to you, if he's not sure of the case, then it was irresponsible to file the FIR.
Well, look, it's not for me to question whether they did whatever due diligence is necessary. I'm personally quite happy that when the CBI files something for investigation, this is the first step, that it isn't necessarily committed to coming to a conclusion that the people involved have to be charged. Nothing wrong with that.
Except that you're damning in the public eye the reputation of India's third largest industrialist by revenue. You're damning in the public eye the reputation of one of the most honorable and respected civil servants. And is it fair to do so when you yourself have doubts of the veracity of the FIR and you're giving interviews to the Economic Times 24 or 40 hours later to say that the people I've moved an FIR against could well be innocent?
Well, look, I don't know what he said in the interview. I've seen some newspaper reports. It's certainly true, by the way, that any damage to reputation, both of the civil servant and of Mr. Birla, highly regrettable. On the other hand, we need to develop a civilized approach to the whole business of investigation. I mean, if we are going to have independent investigation, if you're going to have investigation, which is in this case supervised by the Supreme Court, there are going to be first steps taken. You must allow the investigating authority the right to go further into the evidence, and based on that, they may or may not decide to frame a charge.
You know, you began with a very interesting phrase. You said we need to have a civilized way of doing investigations. Now, this is an investigation being monitored by the Supreme Court. It's not under the government's control.
Absolutely not.
But do you think that after this experience, there is need for the Supreme Court to advise the CBI to exercise caution, care, and restraint before they file FIRs? Do they need to think twice, maybe thrice, before they file an FIR?
Well, it would be presumptuous of me to pronounce on what the Supreme Court should be doing, but I would say that the basic point that I'm making is that we need a system where if investigating agencies want to investigate, there must be a way in which they can do that without damage to reputations, without the presumption of innocence until proved guilty being in some sense washed away. It's not just the agencies, it's the newspapers you have to hold responsible.
But you know, in this instance, unfortunately, let me finish my question. In this instance, unfortunately, the CBI has gone even further, because after filing the FIR, CBI sources are now leaking to newspapers like the Indian Express that they have suspicions that coal blocks allotted to two companies that Mr. Parekh joined a year and more after he retired, well after the cooling off period was finished, are things that they have doubts and questions about, and they want to now question him about them. And they haven't explained why. And I put it to you that all they're doing is to throw mud. To use that English phrase, all they're doing is to give a dog a bad name. Is it fair?
Well, I can't comment on newspaper comments on what somebody is reported to have said to the press.
But that's how people's reputations are damned.
I think that's an issue that the system, the CBI and others need to address, because it's certainly true that a high-profile investigation can lead to a lot of unintended and unjustified damage, and the system must prevent that.
Do you and does the government regret the damage that has been done, not just to Mr. Birla, not just to Mr. Parekh, but to the mood of Indian industry, and beyond that, to the mood of Indian civil servants?
Well, let me say the Prime Minister's statement in this particular case, because in this particular case, the re-examination was initiated by a representation which was forwarded by the Prime Minister's office. I think the Prime Minister's office has come out loud and clear that on the facts that they have it, there was nothing wrong. I think that should reassure civil servants who feel that, you know, if there's a problem, they won't be backed. Here's an endorsement. As far as industry is concerned, it should actually reassure them also that when the government is convinced that the case is correct and right, the government does not hold back from expressing its opinion.
Mr. Ahluwalia, let's take a break there. When I come back, I want to focus more intensively on what this FIR means for Indian industry and the Indian civil service. That's in a moment's time. Don't go away. Welcome back to Devil's Advocate and a special interview with the Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, Montek Singh Ahluwalia. Mr. Ahluwalia, let's focus a little specifically on the impact this FIR has had on Indian industry and the mood of industrialists, and then after that on Indian civil servants. It's created a sense of anguish, if not anger, in Indian industry. From Adi Godrej to Narayan Murthy, from Kiran Majumdar Shaw to Naina Lal Kadwai, they've expressed horror and disapproval. Do you share, can you understand that reaction?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I've heard them on television. You know, I think we need to recognize that when there is a public perception that the system is being subverted, there will be a lot of investigation. The test is not whether something is picked up for investigation. The test is it done fairly? Does the government come as clear as possible on the side that it believes is right? And most importantly, is everything decided quickly? And I would just say that on this particular case, Indian industry should take note of the fact that Mr. Birla is now in a position to say that if the facts are what they are on the file, there was nothing wrong in the decision, which was actually not against anybody. You mentioned that. It's not that something was taken away from the public sector and given to Hindalco.
Mr. Ahluwalia, listen to what you're saying.
They shared it.
Listen to what you're saying. It took the Prime Minister's intervention in the shape and form of a 5-page press release to clear Mr. Birla and Mr. Parikh's name. Until that happened, for a good 3 days before, there were serious question marks in the press about the probity and integrity of two people whose good name is their calling card. And that is what the CBI, that is what the system seems to have forgotten. Can you be sure that the CBI won't repeat this again? Because that's a question mark that Indian industry is asking.
Well, look, I'm in no position to comment on what the CBI will or will not do. They're an autonomous agency. I mean, the world wants them to be an autonomous agency. They're not under the control of the government.
But
nobody wants them.
But be fair.
Fine, but then we should address that issue to the CBI itself. Let me say, you said 3 days. 3 days is a remarkably short time to clarify anything.
Absolutely.
Nothing is
but the
clarified.
Clarification came from the PM, not the CBI. The CBI hasn't changed its stand. It's standing by its original allegation.
Look, the problem, I would put it this way. You've got a situation where if the CBI, in doing its job, files an FIR, the real problem is that television channels give that 90% attention.
No, forgive me. I don't think it's fair and right. No, I don't think it's fair and right that you should make the media the blame boy over here. Undoubtedly, when the CBI filed the charge sheet alleging that Kumaramangalam Birla, the third largest industrialist in the country, is alleged to be conspiring and therefore alleged to be guilty of corruption, the media will pick it up. It is a big story. It has to be. The problem is that the CBI probably shot its bullet. It jumped the gun. It was impetuous. Blame the CBI. Don't blame the press. No press in the world could have avoided that story.
No, let me say one thing. There are a lot of allegations against top corporations around the world. The press does not present them in this one-sided way, the way they do in our country.
Forgive me. Just this weekend, the story, unconfirmed at the moment, that JP Morgan Chase Manhattan may have to pay a penalty of 13 billion was the lead item on CNN and BBC, and it was unconfirmed. It was unconfirmed. But because of the magnitude of the amount being paid in penalty and the size of the company, it was a major story. But the same applies in India to Kumaramangalam Birla being accused of conspiracy and corruption.
Okay, I don't want to get into the issue of whether our press builds it up more than the others.
Let's come back.
That is an important issue.
Let's come back to Indian industry. There is speculation, there is talk that industrialists are worried that in this environment they don't wish to invest, that the environment is not conducive, that they're looking perhaps to take their money abroad. Doesn't that worry you at the moment?
Oh, absolutely. I've heard that. I've heard industrialists say that. You know, we are going through a transition. I think how we behave in these important things will affect how people read things later on in future.
So this is a test case?
Well, since it's a high-profile case, it is a test case, and I hope that they read the signals correctly. You know, it cannot be the case. It cannot be the case that on the one hand, you have supervised investigations to dig out wrongdoing, and on the other hand, nobody is actually identified as doing anything wrong.
Let me ask you a simple question.
You need to resolve these conflicts.
Indian industry is hearing you. You are Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission and you're known to be very close to the Prime Minister. What is the message of assurance or reassurance you want Indian industry to hear today? Tell me in 30 crisp seconds.
30 seconds. Well, my personal view is that the government is very aware that you cannot run an efficient, dynamic country by constantly throwing blame and suspicion on industry. You need a helpful, cooperative atmosphere. At the same point, when you have a high-level, high-profile probe, what you need to do is to move things quickly, to be transparent, and where the government is concerned, come clean. I think we've done that on this case brilliantly.
In the same spirit, Speaking as Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission and someone who is known to be close to the Prime Minister, what message do you want to give to Indian civil servants? Because many of them are saying that if a 68-year-old man, 8 years after his retirement, can become the subject of an FIR and motivated leaks to the media for no apparent good reason, then clearly civil servants will say to themselves, should we be taking decisions or should we instead do nothing? Because who knows when that decision will become a target used against me. How can you reassure them that this is not a trap?
That's an extremely good point, but I would hope that this decision at least does reassure them that in this particular case, for example, the former coal secretary, yes, for 2 days he wasn't sure what was going on, but now he is saying that the Prime Minister has endorsed what he's done and said.
You know, the Economic Times today on its front page has said that although the Cabinet Committee of Investment has done admirable work clearing 92 projects worth some 350,000 lakh crore, there are still projects worth 400 lakh crore that need clearance. But after what's happened to Mr. Parekh, will civil servants who are essential to do that clearance for you want to do it, or will they say, hang on, there's too much of a risk. The next government will turn around and charge us. The very things that we've done to clear projects will then become targets to be used against us. You may suddenly find that the CCI stalls because the CBI has put the fear of life into bureaucrats whose assistance you need.
Well, that danger is certainly there. Prime Minister himself, I mean, he has said that honest civil servants have nothing to fear, but the concern that something could become controversial is definitely there. We need to resolve that in a systemic manner. What the CCI can do, by the way, is it can provide the political endorsement of whatever is put forward. I mean, I think if civil servants aren't sure, let them put forward the 3 or 4 options before the CCI and let the CCI take the decision.
But in a nutshell, you're saying to civil servants, because they're probably hearing you, don't be frightened. The government will support good work. The government will not use your decisions as a target against you.
I certainly hope so, and it certainly shouldn't.
My last question, and it goes now in a sense to an issue that the audience perhaps cares about. Are you worried that what lies deep beneath the whole Colgate scandal, not this particular Hindalco instance, but the whole Colgate scandal, and perhaps even 2G, the issue of crony capitalism is something that vitiates Indian industry? What message do you want to send to industrialists about crony capitalism and the way it is vitiating economic development in India?
Well, I think, you know, as many newspapers today have said, the Prime Minister himself has raised these questions. It is being raised by everybody. We have to create an environment in which people do not think that it's the crony capitalist who's getting all the benefits. There's no question about that. What we can say, by the way, is that what you're seeing right now are problems with the way things were done in the past. I think not enough credit is being given to the fact that both in coal and in spectrum, with effect from now, allocations are going to be on the basis of auction. We are seeing a transition, the build-up of a pipeline. This is not going to be a problem in future.
So in a nutshell, your conclusion is those were problems of the past. The future will not see them recurring.
That is absolutely correct and absolutely important.
Montek Singh, Ahluwalia, a pleasure speaking to you.
Thanks.